Hello to everyone. My name is Professor Mary McCarran, and I look forward to having a conversation with you all this evening. Many of you, indeed, I may have met over the years. I'm a professor at Trinity and have been working in the field of dementia for a very long time. And I'm the executive director of the new National Intellectual Disability Memory Service, which has been set up at Tallaght University Hospital, and this has been set up in conjunction with Trinity College and the Daughters of Charity Disability Support Service, and we're hopefully excited about that. It's supported by the National Dementia Office, and the Government Dormant Account Funds give us some seed funding to set this up. And the reason for this really has been that I suppose throughout my career, and I've been working in the field for a very long time, we know that there is inequity of access for people who have memory concerns and who are looking to access services. And very often the generic memory services are not resourced to support people who have got a pre-existing intellectual impairment, and this can be problematic. And also, as well, there's a difference in age. And while we know that there are some services in Ireland that are very well developed, and we have very good services in some regions, like the Daughters of Charity in St. Michael's House and the Brothers and Cope, we've also found, though, that there is grave inequity, that unless you're attached maybe to some of those larger services, that you're actually not able to get properly assessed or to get a referral if you have concerns about your memory. And one of the most critical, important issues is that people with an intellectual disability and with Down syndrome are afforded a proper diagnosis and a comprehensive diagnosis and a proper diagnostic workup, and that we need to make sure that we treat what is treatable. And there are just so many conditions that often people with Down syndrome are more common as they age. So I met this elderly mum, and she was in desperation looking to have her son assessed by somebody for a serious memory concern. And I remember meeting with her, and she came to St. James's Hospital, or St. Patrick's at the time, to meet with me. And I remember meeting that mum coming in with her son, who was in his 50s, mid 50s, with really advanced to late Alzheimer's disease. And I never forgot the distress on that woman's face as I walked her back to Houston Station. And I thought, well, before I hang up my clogs in its totality, I really want to address that huge inequity. And I was very bothered by the fact that that woman and that man had to travel from Tralee, very distressed, and they had spent ages trying to get a referral. And I think it was to Down Syndrome Ireland, actually, that they eventually made their way to see somebody like me. So I really did hope that at some stage I might be in a position to drive the development of a national memory clinic for people with intellectual disability, and that we would have appropriate services throughout the country, with satellite services throughout the country as we grow and develop. So that's just a little bit of the background to why the clinic was set up and the purpose of the clinic. And I'm going to hand over to Professor Emer McGlinchey, who's just going to give a short presentation, I suppose, to outline it in a little more detail. And I'm handing over now to Emer. So thank you, Emer. And Emer, if you want to put that on slideshow, that would be great. That's perfect, Emer. Thank you.
No, sorry about that. I'm unmuted now. Thank you so much. And thank you all so much for joining. And you're all really welcome. And it is a shame we can't meet in person and have a conversation. I really looked forward, or really enjoyed, when I met some of you at in different branches around the country a year or so ago, and look forward to when we can do that again. But in the meantime, we'll start with some good news for 2020. I think we can all do with a little bit of good news in 2020. And I think, as Mary said, this is a service that has been needed for so long and is so important that I think it's something that we can mark down in our calendar as something good that happened in 2020. So this service will provide equal access to memory services for people around the country, and it's a central place for assessment, for diagnosis, and for support. So first of all, this just shows some of our members of the team. So Professor Mary McCarran, who just spoke, and Professor Sean Kennelly, who's the clinical director of the service, who couldn't join us this evening. But Sean Kennelly is a consultant geriatrician, and he set up the memory service in Tala Hospital, the general population memory service, and he's now also the clinical director of the National Intellectual Disability Memory Service. Then Jeanette Terrell is the consultant psychiatrist who specializes in intellectual disability, and she's joined the team. And Sharon Mulligan, who's the clinical administrator. So you'll meet Sharon if you come to the service, or we'll have some communication with her. And then some other members of our team are also here who might just introduce themselves, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So
Hi.
Evelyn.
Yeah, sure, of course. Hi, everybody. It's lovely to be here joining Emer and Mary. So at the National Memory Clinic, we would like to think that we provide an accurate and timely diagnosis to all people who come to the clinic so that they get the appropriate supports to maintain their independence and to indeed to live well with dementia. And that is so important, because there are so many things that we can do for people if they do have a diagnosis. And indeed, going forward, we hope to have a hotline at the Memory Clinic where family members can contact us, where services can contact us, and we can help them make plans to access resources to plan for the future. But there is great hope for people who, with Down syndrome, who may have a diagnosis of Alzheimer's type dementia, and there is an awful lot we can do. And this is what will be provided at the National Memory Clinic. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Evelyn. And Pamela, you there? I think you're on mute, Pamela.
Thank you.
Thank
Pamela
you.
Dunn. I'm a clinical nurse specialist in dementia, and it's really lovely to have the opportunity of working in the National Intellectual Disability Memory Service, and looking forward to meeting so many of you all, hopefully when you come to meet us over the time. And as Evelyn was saying, and Emer will be saying, really what the National Intellectual Disability Memory Service is about giving a timely diagnosis, but supporting people to live well throughout a journey of dementia. And as we'll hear from Emer, there's a lot of hope and a lot of good things happening in the field of dementia. So yeah, I look forward to meeting you all.
Thanks so much.
I'll introduce as well, Emer. My name is Marianne Fallon. I'm working with the NIDMS as the Education and Training Officer. And I suppose one of the things that we know is really important is that staff around the country working in services are learning how to support people who may have early signs of memory issues, and also support people who may be diagnosed with dementia to live well with dementia. So that's one of the things that we'll be focusing on. Doing the master classes with Mary, facilitating all of the master classes from now to the end of the year and into the new year. It's something that we feel is very important, and I'm delighted to be part of that. So thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Marianne. So I'll just introduce a brief summary of what the National ID Memory Service will offer. And sometimes in the presentation, I might use this NIDMS, so the shortened version. So you know, if you see that I'm talking about the memory service. So this is a new service that started earlier this year, and it provides access to specialist assessment for people with an intellectual disability and a full diagnostic workup. So what we mean here by a diagnostic workup is that we'll do a medical check, so including blood tests, to make sure that there aren't any other medical reasons that someone might be experiencing memory or cognitive problems. And so I'll come back to each of these in more detail as we go through the presentation, but just as a quick summary, what the memory service will do and will provide. So it will provide information to people, and this includes easy read information on things like brain health, on living with dementia, and on supporting someone with diagnosis of dementia. And there's also some easy read information around accessing to the service and coming to the service. We also will offer a brain health check, and this is also sometimes called a baseline assessment. If someone is experiencing memory problems or has concerns already, people can be referred to the memory service for a full assessment and then diagnosis and treatment if that's necessary. We also offer support after a diagnosis, so support for people who are living with dementia and their family members. And finally, we will offer the opportunity to be involved in different research programs, and I'll talk about all of these again in a little bit. First of all, I just want to talk about brain health more generally. So when I'm talking about brain health, I'm talking about what we can all do to keep our brains working in the best way that they can. And luckily, there are things that we can do throughout our lives that can really help us to keep our brains healthy as we get older. So when you were registering and you had the opportunity to type in some questions, we got lots of questions asking about tips on how to keep our brains healthy and how to help our memory. So these are 5 tips, and they don't cover everything. So there are other things like, for example, getting enough sleep that we know is important for our brain. But these are 5 things that research has shown and that we know is really important. So the first thing to remember and to think about is that what's good for your heart is good for your brain. So the more we find out about the brain, the more we know that it's really linked to how healthy our body is, and especially how healthy our heart is. So we've known for a long time that high cholesterol is bad for our heart, but it's also bad for our brain. And similarly, high blood pressure. If you have high blood pressure, it's important to get that checked and to try and address it, and that will help your heart, but it will also help your brain. So number 2 is to be physically active. And this is really one of the things that there's most research on of what we can do to really help our brains to stay healthy. Exercise makes a lot of changes in your brain, and it can act like a medicine where it makes chemical changes to our bodies and to our brains. So this can help our immune system. It can produce antioxidants. So this helps our brain to fight off disease, and it can help our brain cells to get this healthy boost. And another way that exercise helps is that it increases our blood flow. And so it gets this good blood into the brain, which gives our brain nutrients and can also help to clear out some of the bad stuff in the brain that we want to get rid of. The third tip then is to follow a healthy diet. And this really ties into the first one of looking after your heart. So a healthy diet will help to keep your heart healthy and also to help keep your brain healthy. So research really at the minute is showing that a diet that is best for your heart and for your brain is a Mediterranean type diet. So this is a diet that's really high in fresh fruit, fresh vegetables, fish, things like olive oil instead of butter. So it's trying to reduce the amount of saturated fats and red meat and dairy in our diet. The fourth thing then is to challenge your brain. So the more we use and exercise our brain, like any other muscle, the stronger it grows. So the more we can learn something new, or that we can challenge ourselves in different ways, we can grow new brain cells, and we can also strengthen the connection between different brain cells. So the stronger the connections between our cells, the healthier our brain. And so there are lots of different ways that you can challenge your brain. And I think it would be really important that you pick the one that works best for you, because everyone is different. But some of the popular ones are doing things like puzzles or brain training games or crosswords. Or it could be learning something new. So I know something like the Latch On program, or learning how to cook, or learning how to use a computer. So the more we always try to challenge ourselves and keep challenging ourselves with new things, the more our brains are working and can have stronger connections. So the fifth one is to enjoy social activities, which I am aware that now is not a good time to be saying that, given that we're all very restricted in how much we can engage and enjoy social activities with each other. So something like Zoom, if that works for you to help staying in touch with friends or family, is something that you might do. But it's also important to think of these tips as these are tips throughout our whole lifetime. So these are things that we can do throughout our lives. So even though we're in a strange situation at the minute, we can remember this when we're able to engage with each other again, that really being engaged in social activity is something that will be really helpful. And so keeping our brain healthy and strong when you're younger can help to keep it healthy and strong when you're older. So it's almost like a savings account where throughout your whole life, if you're doing all of these things and putting it into a savings account, you could then use this later on in later years in life. So moving on to more specifically from brain health to look at dementia risk factors. So this picture here is from one of the biggest studies that have been done on what are the factors that lead to risk for dementia. So there are a number of different things here. You can see that some of the things are around not doing physical activity, smoking or drinking too much, air pollution, not having a lot of social contact, being overweight or obese. Hearing impairment is also a risk, and so it's important that hearing aids are working and if they're needed, or to get a hearing test. Having high blood pressure or diabetes is a risk factor, head injury or less education. And the good thing about knowing about these risk factors is that we know there are lots of things that we can do to try and address them. So thinking back to the slide before, if we look at those, if we look at the tips around keeping your heart healthy, so managing blood pressure, diabetes or cholesterol, staying physically active, eating a healthy diet, challenging yourself and learning something new, and staying socially engaged, we're able to address a lot of these risk factors, and it's thought that this can reduce the risk of dementia by up to 40%. So at the minute, these kind of lifestyle changes are really the best thing that we have for preventing dementia. We don't yet have a medicine to do this, but that these can really build up throughout your life to really make a big difference. And I think the most important message here is that it's never too early to start and it's never too late to start. So when we're thinking about dementia, these lifestyle factors are really our best method of delaying or preventing dementia. Another question that came in was what is the difference between Alzheimer's disease and dementia? And this can come up a lot, where Alzheimer's disease is the brain disease. So it's the disease that happens in the brain that causes dementia. So dementia is then the changes or the behaviors that happen because of this disease. So Alzheimer's disease is one of the causes of dementia. I'll just mention briefly the association between Down syndrome and Alzheimer's disease and why there is an association. So most people with Down syndrome have 3 copies of chromosome 21. And it's chromosome 21 that produces this gene called the APP gene, or the amyloid precursor protein gene. So because people with Down syndrome have 3 copies of chromosome 21, more of this amyloid precursor protein, or this APP gene, is produced. So this gene doesn't cause any problems in general, and it doesn't do anything bad in and of itself. But if there's too much of it and it's not being cleared out of the brain, it can start to form and make these clumps together, these sticky clumps that stick together and cause plaques. And it's these plaques that are called amyloid plaques that we think are the main thing that causes Alzheimer's disease. So that's why there's an association between the two. Another question that came in, so I just wanted to address it briefly here, is to ask about what are some of the early signs of dementia. So I'll talk about some of these broadly. Some of the early signs are unexpected memory loss, or a new difficulty or decline in doing everyday tasks that used to be familiar. Maybe more difficulty in paying attention. If somebody is getting lost or confused in situations that were familiar to them. There could be personality changes, like less enthusiasm for doing activities that someone used to be very enthusiastic about, or becoming more irritable, or sadness or anxiety. It may be someone has a difficulty with walking or coordination, or if someone has new seizures that just developed in adulthood. So these are just some examples and of some of the early signs, but noticing one of these things doesn't mean that you have a dementia. There can be lots of other causes for these, but they're just some examples of things that can be noticed in the early stages of dementia. Okay, so now I just want to give some information on the National Intellectual Disability Memory Service, and a lot of the questions that came in from when you were registering, I hope that the next few slides will answer a lot of those. So first of all, where is the service? So the memory service is located in Tala Hospital. It's in the Russell Centre in Tala Hospital. So the building is actually outside of the main hospital grounds, which means you don't have to come into the main hospital to come to the service. There were a few questions also about what support we offer to rural areas in the country and for people accessing the service outside Dublin. And so this is something that we know is very important, and we plan to develop satellite centres in different places around the country so that people won't always have to travel into Dublin. And this is something we're working on, and we know how important it is. But in the first step, we have to develop at first the central memory clinic, and then we'll build this out to develop these satellite centres. And the most critical thing at the minute is that people are able to get an accurate and timely diagnosis, and that there is somewhere to go for that. So looking at then, how do you access the service? So if you have concerns, you can contact your doctor and ask a doctor to send a referral letter into the service to us. So within this letter, it will outline what are the concerns or what are the changes that have happened. And the letter should also include the name of a carer that can be contacted. So after we get the letter, Evelyn or Pamela will call the named carer and ask some questions and go through some of the concerns that have been noticed. And after this, the whole clinical team will meet to see if these are the types of concerns that the memory service may be able to help with. And if that's the case, then you'll get an appointment and will be given a date to come to the memory service. So what will happen once you come to the memory service? So initially when you come, you'll meet Pamela and Evelyn, and they'll do a few different things to test memory and planning and attention. And these are different kinds of games. If anyone is interested in the specific instruments you use, so we use the TSI, the CamCog DS, the Brief Praxis, the CamDex DS, and the DLT are some of the different instruments that we use to do this. Pamela and Evelyn will also speak to the carer and again ask questions about any changes or concerns that have happened over the last while. And there'll also then be additional tests like blood tests, an ECG to check heart rhythm, and will also be offered a CT or an MRI scan if it's necessary. And this whole process is the same process that's used in the general population. And we felt that it was really important to make sure that the same processes are in place and people are given the opportunity to have all the same different tests that is done in the general population. After you then meet Evelyn and Pamela, so again, the whole clinical team will meet and they will discuss and come to an agreement on what the best course of action is next. So what will happen and what the recommendations are going forward. So after this consensus meeting, you may be given some additional information on brain health. You may be referred to a GP with more information, or may be invited to come back in a year or two. Or else after this meeting, you may be invited to come to an appointment to meet Professor Sean Kennelly for further consultation. I'll just talk a little bit about some of the ways that COVID has affected the service and some things that have happened. So the very first thing is that there was a delay in opening the service. So we were meant to launch the service on the 21st of March on World Down Syndrome Day, but COVID happened just before then, and so it was delayed. But we have since opened in the summer and have started seeing people. And we're just maybe not doing everything as we normally would have done before COVID. So in some cases, we're meeting people using computers like this, using Zoom. And some of the games or the assessments that Pamela and Evelyn do will need to be done face-to-face, but there are other things for example, talking to a carer that we might be able to use computer for. And so we're adapting and trying to meet people as best we can. And so what this may mean is that if you're referred to the service now, there may be an initial meeting on the computer, and then you may be invited to come back at another time. As I said, we're also offering support after a diagnosis for people living with dementia. And some of this we're still developing, and we'll continue to develop and grow this. But it's possible to book an appointment with the team if you have particular concerns. So you can send an email to nidms@tcg.ie. Another thing that we'll offer at the memory service, and that I mentioned a little while ago, is a brain health check, or this is sometimes called a baseline assessment. So a brain health check, what is it? So a brain health check is really to check things like memory, attention, planning. And it's really important that this isn't a type of exam. So we are using the same games that Evelyn and Pamela use, and we'll also ask some different questions. And again, this is also known, or would sometimes referred to as a baseline assessment. So we do this at a young age. So it's generally recommended from 30 to 35. And we do this at a young age so that when someone is older, if they experience memory problems or are worried about changes later in life, we can do the same tests again and then compare the two. So because everyone is different, we want to be able to compare to when someone is performing at their best. And that's why it's sometimes called a baseline assessment. So it's something that it can be used years later to see if there has been any change. And so I really want to be clear that a brain health check or getting a brain health check is no cause at all for concern, and that at age 30 or 35, there wouldn't be any concerns in relation to dementia, but it would be something similar to getting an annual health check. And the other positive thing about getting a brain health check is that it gives an opportunity to have a discussion about promoting better brain health. So we'll be developing some information so that we can give everyone who comes to get a brain health check a personalized prevention plan. And this is something that we'll be, again, developing over time. So the brain health check at the memory service will be done by me or by Andrew. To get a brain health check, again, you'll need a letter from your doctor. So it will be referred in the same way, where a doctor will send a letter of referral to the National Intellectual Disability Memory Service at Tallaght University Hospital. And within this letter can say that there are no concerns at the minute, but that it is being referred for a brain health check. After we then get the letter, we'll invite you to come into Tallaght. And again, over time, we'd hope that this will be available in different parts of the country. But at the minute, this is in the central service in Tallaght in Dublin. After your brain health check, we'll then give you some information on brain health, and we'll keep your memory on the we'll keep your information in the system in Tallaght. If you agree for your information, it can be used for research to help us to understand what changes happen over time. And if this is used for research, your name won't be attached to anything; it'll be given a number. But this is, of course, only if you agree. So you don't have to agree for it to be used in research, and you'll get the exact same care no matter what. And this is just an example of some of the easy read materials that we've developed and that will be up on our website shortly that you'll be able to download. So this is some information around living with dementia. There's some information around tips for better brain health, and there are some other pieces that I can't fully remember all the different ones we have, but they'll be all available on our website, and they'll be free to download. So I mentioned research just a minute ago, and just want to talk a little bit more about the research we'll be doing at the memory service and how you or someone you support can get involved. So first of all, we think it's really important that people with Down syndrome are given the opportunity to be involved in brain health research and in dementia research. And one type of research that's happening is trying to prevent dementia before it starts. And so this will focus research at a much younger age. So one project that I may have spoken to some of you about before if I met you in some of the branches last year is a project called Prevent Dementia DS. So there's a large project in the general population that is called Prevent, and it's in the UK and Ireland. And the project I'm doing is adapted to include people with Down syndrome, which is why it's called Prevent Dementia DS. So I just want to talk briefly about the reasons for doing the project and what we hope to learn from the project. And then I'll say what is involved if you participate. So when we're talking about dementia, we're talking about when people are showing signs of changes. So when people have memory changes or changes in personality or changes in behavior. And if we're talking about preventing dementia, we need to look at what happens before people start experiencing changes or showing symptoms. So I spoke a little bit earlier about plaques and tangles and these things that can develop in the brain. And so when we're talking about Alzheimer's disease, these are some of the things that are really important and that we know is really associated with Alzheimer's disease. At the minute, a lot of the treatments that people are trying to develop are really trying to target these amyloid plaques and tangles that are already in the brain. You might have heard of a drug that was in the news recently called aducanumab. There was a lot of very positive and hopeful research around that, and it's had a bit of a setback recently, but there still is a lot of work being done in the area. But now a lot of research is looking at what if we went much further back? So what if these changes, we believe these changes start happening decades before there are any symptoms or any signs. And so if we look back at that 20, 30 years or more before there were any symptoms, can we stop the disease process before it starts? And so to do this, we want to find things called biomarkers or biological markers. So a biomarker is something that you can measure in the body. So a lot of them can be measured either in the blood or measured in the brain doing an MRI. And the more we can find out about these biomarkers or what happens at the very earliest stages before the disease process even starts or gets going, once we know what they are and how to measure them, can treatment then be provided at that stage, so to stop the disease before it starts. So this could be something like recognizing blood pressure and treating blood pressure before it leads to any heart disease. So this is a really big job, and there's a lot of research going on in the general population, and there's been huge advancements in this in the last number of years. And there have been some biomarkers found that look like we can measure these in blood, but there's still a lot of work to do. And it's really important that while this work is being done, that people with Down syndrome are included in this type of research. So I'll just mention briefly then what is involved in the project. So if you were to get involved in Prevent Dementia DS, what will happen? So first of all, we will include people with Down syndrome between the ages of 25 and 49. We'll ask some questions about you and about your lifestyle. We'll do some health checks, so things like blood pressure, listen to your heart rhythm, look at height and weight. We'll do a blood test. We'll ask you to do a MRI scan. And we'll also do some of these games that I mentioned earlier, similar to the games that Pamela and Evelyn will do. And this project is part of a larger project that's happening throughout Europe. So there's a group throughout Europe called the Horizon 21 European Down Syndrome Consortium. And this is a group of projects from all around Europe who are all looking at similar things. So looking at ways, biomarkers that are associated with dementia in people with Down syndrome, with the goal of looking at a way to prevent dementia. And so being part of this consortium is a kind of there's strength in numbers type of thing, where the more people we can have and to be included in research, the more that we can find out. Another research project that we will be running in the service is looking at how to develop best practice guidelines to give support to people who are living with dementia. And so in this project, we want to understand what are the current experience for people with an intellectual disability who are living with dementia and their families. We want to know what supports are currently available and what supports are needed. And we also want to look at this from a national level. So to see what are the best examples of care around the country, and what can we learn from those examples so that we can ensure that there's the best care all around the country. So from this project, we want to develop these best practice guidelines that can be used in services across the country. And finally, we're really interested in hearing from you and your input into research. So not just as participants in research studies, but also sharing your experiences to help to build the research. So as I mentioned, as part of the Prevent Dementia DS study, there will be an MRI scan. And I'm really interested if you or someone you support has had an MRI scan. I'd love to talk to you to find out more about what your experience was like. So is there something that you wish you had known before you had the MRI that you think would have helped you? Or is there any advice you can give us so that when people are coming into the study that we can make it the best experience that it can be? So if you'd be happy to share your experience, I'd love to hear from you. And if you're interested in any of this, so whether it's the Prevent Dementia DS project, the project looking at post-diagnostic support, or if you'd like to talk about your experiences in an MRI, then please do get in touch. I'd really love to hear from you. So I just want to do a quick summary because I know I've given a lot of information on what it is that the Memory Service offers and what's here now and what we'll be developing a little bit more. So information is developed, easy read information, and that will be on our website really soon. We're currently taking referrals if you're interested in a brain health check to get a referral letter from a doctor. The appointments for this might be subject to COVID because these will happen within the Memory Service in Tala. And so we hope that these will be able to start these appointments early next year in January, February. If you have a concern at the minute or are concerned about someone you support in terms of decline or changes, you can get a letter from your doctor to refer into the Memory Service and you'll be contacted by Evelyn or Pamela. Similarly, if you are looking for advice on post-diagnostic support, you can email NIDMS@tcd.ie and we can arrange an appointment with the clinical team. And finally then, research. So this is, again, getting started. Some of it might be subject to COVID and what restrictions are in place, but if you are interested, would really love to hear from you. So I'm just going to finish with two quotes from two really brilliant and inspiring women that hopefully will leave us on a very hopeful note around dementia and intellectual disability. So the first quote is from Mei-Lin Yap. So Mei-Lin is a self-advocate and member of the steering committee at the National Intellectual Disability Memory Service, among many other things. And at a conference last year, Mei-Lin spoke about the subject of dementia, and she gave an incredibly powerful speech. And I'll just read a very small part of that. So Mei-Lin said, "Like everybody here, I have dreams for the future. There are things that I want to do, and I know dementia might play a part of my life too. So when you start talking about dementia, I want to be included in that conversation. I want to be included in the conversation about my future. I want to be empowered so that I can choose how to reduce the risk of dementia." And the final quote before I leave is from Dr. Maria Carrillo, who's the Chief Science Officer at the Alzheimer's Association in the US, which is the leading organization on Alzheimer's research worldwide and oversees a lot of the global research programs. And Maria, in an interview earlier on this year, said that we are on the verge of something truly transformational. The first survival of Alzheimer's disease may be reading this story now. It's not a matter of if we will find an answer, it's a matter of when. So thank you so much for listening, and we'll really welcome any questions. And again, really sorry that we don't get to talk to each other as we normally would.
Thank you very much, Emer. That's wonderful, and you might just unshare. That's wonderful. So thank you very much, Emer. I think that was a wonderful and hopefully helpful presentation, and helps people to understand the service that we have available, and know where to contact, which is always really important should you have any questions. I know one question did come in People did ask about where they can get information and where they can get the handouts, and if the presentation will be sent on. And yes, we will send on the presentation so people can have that. And the handouts will be up on our website, and we give information in relation to where you can get information on that. Another question was, is dementia inevitable in people with Down syndrome? And what I'd really say to that is, not everybody will definitely get Alzheimer's disease, and that's really important. So that's the first message I want to say. You know, not everybody will get it. But what we do, and it's very unusual that anybody with Down syndrome under the age of 40 years has dementia. You generally do not see dementia in people with Down syndrome under the age of 40, and generally it's because of some other underlying etiology, and it would be very rare that we would see, very, very rare that we would see dementia under that age. What we do know is, though, as people come to 50 and over, your risk of getting dementia with Down syndrome does increase. And I suppose this is the first time, which is really to be celebrated, that people with Down syndrome have lived to old age. And we have people now with Down syndrome in their 60s, in their 70s, and even one lady in her 80s. And what we are really wanting to push out is that, and this is to be celebrated, but we also feel that aging in poor health for any of us is an empty prize. So we want to make sure, as Emer has said, that we prevent people with Down syndrome from getting dementia. And we work hard to research and to brain health, etc., to make that happen. So the two key messages is, no, it's not, everybody will definitely not get dementia. It's really unusual in people with Down syndrome under the age of 40, but its risk does increase and substantially increase as people with Down syndrome age. And we're seeing really an average age of onset around 51 years. So that's why it's so critical that people get their brain checked and that they come for appropriate assessment. And we also know that there's so many other conditions that mimic dementia, particularly that are prevalent in people when they're in their 40s or early 50s. And we need to outrule those and treat what is treatable. So that is what's really important. But as Emer says, it is all now about prevention, and it is all now about getting, you know, a brain health check and getting that baseline. And if people, and the most critical thing with the National Memory Clinic will be that we will be able to get a proper diagnostic workup, and that people will get a comprehensive diagnosis. And so often in the past, people were just given a diagnosis of dementia, and people automatically assume, well, that's what happens to somebody with Down syndrome when they're in the 40s, without having a proper workup. And also there's great variability in age of onset, where we might see some people develop it in their dementia in their late 40s or start with memory problems. We then see some people who are, you know, in their late 50s or even early 60s when they begin to show the clinical symptoms of dementia, the clinical signs, or begin to present with the memory problems. So hopefully that answers that question for people. I'll just see here, can you recommend brain exercise or games or phone apps? Emer, maybe you want to talk, or Pamela, about that?
Yeah, the only one that I can recommend, in that I've heard it, it's been used, I know, in other research studies. So I used a program in a research study I did, but it's actually not available at the minute. But another study used an app called Cognifit. So I can't recommend it in terms of personal experience. I haven't used it, but the study that used it said that it was useful and usable. So that's, I'll just put that, the name of it in the chat now. But again, I can't give personal experience on using it.
Pamela, do you want to add anything to that, or Evelyn, or Marianne? You need to unmute, Pamela.
Yeah, there isn't one particular app that we would recommend. I think, as Emer said, it's a combination of knowing the person and what interests the person, and so encompassing all of the brain health elements. There are some apps we have used for life story and music, but I think, as Emer said, maybe that app she's putting up might be one that people would look at.
And I just the very simple. I'll get you to mute, Pamela. Yeah, I just want to say that the very simple things and important things like doing jigsaw puzzles, playing games, keeping socially connected, keeping active, talking to family and friends, being out, physically active, they are the things that are really important for us all. So many of us won't sit even and use an app. We just do the ordinary everyday things that are just so important for our health and that are available to us all the time. And I would encourage you to just look at those things. They're what's really important. Another question has come in is, do you recommend that all people with Down syndrome over the age of 25 have a brain health check? Well, I mean, certainly we are saying that, you know, it's important to get your brain checked, the same as a physical health check. And certainly, you know, 25, 30, we think it's a really good time. And then we have a really good baseline, and we can keep an eye and we can keep a watch in terms of how people are aging and any problems in memory that they may have. So that's important. But when they would come for the brain health check, I think one of the advantages is we will be doing a physical health check as part of that, and that we will be giving people their own personal brain health plan as part of that consultation, a part of that visit. So I think that's really useful. And then in the future, will there be a national register so that when people with Down syndrome reaches the age for a brain health check, that they will be automatically contacted? Yes, wouldn't that be wonderful? That would be the case, and we would love to see that happen. But at the moment, we're just not there, and we're just trying to get the message out through the like of yourselves and your own organisations that this is what's really important for people, and to know that you can come and have this done. I don't know if there's any other questions. Marianne, do you want to add anything or to say anything there to any of these discussions?
Yes, I noticed a question just came in there, Mary, about the restrictions, the COVID-19 restrictions. Okay. Will they affect people's ability to engage in brain health activities, like what you were saying, getting out and about, getting out for a walk, being able to interact with friends? And it's interesting, that question. I just spoke to a gentleman earlier today who's living very well with dementia, with Down syndrome, but he spoke a lot about keeping his independence, being out in his community, still being able to go out for his walk. So we spoke about that and the importance that had for him. So I suppose our message would be to support people in a safe way within the guidelines and restrictions, to try and keep out for their walks, to, you know, safely socially distance, talk to people they meet in their community, give them the opportunity to talk on a video link with people. All of those things are really, really important.
Great, thank you very much, Marianne. I think that's really good advice, great advice. Okay, is there anything?
I just saw another question on if someone already has a diagnosis of dementia, can you still look for a referral to the memory service? Yeah. And so, sorry, would you like to answer?
To answer that, yeah. Yeah, okay, so if somebody has a diagnosis already, and that diagnosis, so you need to see what additional help that the National Memory Service can give. So it's important that, you know, so if somebody has a really good doctor and a really good team within their own service, and they're happy with that, then they may not need a referral. But if people are unsure, if they have had a full diagnostic workup and would like additional, to have that conversation with the doctor so that the doctor knows that what it is that they're looking for. Like, I mean, you know, there are many people who have been diagnosed with and that's great. And there's a lot of expertise as well out there where people have been properly diagnosed and have had a proper diagnosis. But it may be that somebody is unsure. Maybe people feel they would like to have a scan or further bloods. Maybe people might feel that they would like further advice around medications or post-diagnostic support. And if people are not able to get that in their own area or with the services they're currently with, then by all means have a conversation with your doctor, see what it is that you feel would be benefit to you, and of course by all means you can get that your doctor to refer you, and we will be very happy to see you.
Yeah, and just to add then that there is the option also, if someone is living with the diagnosis of dementia or supporting someone with dementia, that there's a possibility to come to get an appointment for with the whole clinical team in terms of post-diagnostic supports. And that the information, so I know a few people have asked about the website address or the email address or the postal address. And so these are all included in the slides, and we'll send out a copy of the slides to everyone who's registered. So all those different contact details you'll have in the slides.
Okay, that's great. And another question has come in relation to, is this a free service and is it covered by a medical card? Yes, this is a free service and there is no cost of attending, which is great. All we need is just that you have a referral from your doctor to attend. There's another question here in relation to, has the gene ApoE-Ally been identified, and it wasn't found on chromosome 21? Do you want to take that, Eva, or do you want me to answer that?
Yeah, so no, it doesn't have relationship to chromosome 21 as far as I know. So this gene, the ApoE4, is a gene that is associated with an increased risk for dementia. So people will either have an ApoE4 gene or an ApoE2. And ApoE2 is found to be protective, and 4 can sometimes can be a risk for dementia. But as far as I know, that doesn't have an association with chromosome 21.
Yeah, that's correct. And actually, ApoE comes in 3 forms. So there's ApoE2 genotype, ApoE3 genotype, and ApoE4 genotype. And ApoE, and the more than we all probably have either blue eyes or brown eyes or green eyes, sometimes you might have a combination of these genes. So you could be what we would call an ApoE, a 2-3, a 2-2, a 4-4, etc. And we know that the majority of the people have an ApoE3 genotype, over 80%. So they're neither at risk one way or the other. We feel that you're, and that's probably what the majority of the population have. As Emer has said, we know that ApoE2 appears to be somewhat protective, and ApoE3 appears to put you more at risk of developing a dementia. Now, I wouldn't recommend at all that people would go out and have their ApoE checked to see whether or not they were at risk of dementia. And I absolutely wouldn't at all recommend that people do that. The studies to date have found that in the Down syndrome population, that ApoE4 indeed may be implicated in risk for dementia. But what we found was that many people didn't appear to live long enough. And when we looked at age of death, people with ApoE4, it may have had a detrimental effect on people with Down syndrome. We actually found less people in the older age cohort studies that we did that actually had ApoE4. But what I'm saying is, I just wouldn't recommend that you rush out at any level and feel that this was an important test that you needed to get done. Other people say, does medication play a part in the treatment for dementia? And does it affect Down syndrome differently? We know that there is the anti-dementia drugs, which is really the anticholinesterase inhibitors, particularly the like of the Aricept, which is more targeted at early dementia. So as Emer has presented, if we're not picking up people with Down syndrome because we don't have good baseline testing until dementia is advanced, these new drugs that are coming on the market, the potential benefits for people with Down syndrome may actually be reduced. So getting in early with these medications is important. And there has been a number, we have limited clinical trials in saying that on the use of anti-dementia drugs in people with Down syndrome. But what we do know is that the studies that have been done, particularly by VP Pasture, has shown that these medications are safe. And they're safe to use in this population. And there has been a study produced by Andrew Striden's group in 2018 which looked really at the anti-dementing agents and showed that they were effective, and that people who were prescribed these lived longer with dementia, and it did appear to slow the rate by about over 2 years. And that's pretty similar to what we see in the general population. And then there are other drugs called memantine, and this is more targeted for people who are at a more mid-stage dementia or advanced stage of dementia. And this also was found to be useful and found to be safe. So yes, we would at the clinic prescribe these medications. It is really important, if people are being prescribed though, that they have a full physical examination and that a full health check, and that particularly they have an ECG done, because we know that people with Down syndrome can often have a lower heart rate, and sometimes these medications can affect that. So we need to make sure that we do an ECG and that people are monitored and that they have their pulse taken on a regular basis, and we will give guidelines around all of that if medications are being prescribed at the clinic. So just to say that is important.
Brilliant. And I just see one, I know we're just past 8 now, but one last question that has come in is around the waiting times for a brain health check. So at the minute there, we are only just starting to get referrals for a brain health check. So at the minute, there isn't necessarily a waiting time, but because it will involve face-to-face assessments in the service in Dublin, it'll be early next year before we start having those appointments. But please do, if you're interested, do get in touch, get a referral from your doctor that says there are no concerns at the minute, but the person is being referred for a brain health check. And we can then get in touch with you and get the appointment when the restrictions and the guidelines allow that.
Yeah, and that's great, Emer, and thank you very much for that. And just to say, like, we are seeing people at the clinic at the moment. We are seeing people with Down syndrome, particularly who have memory concerns. So if you have people who have memory concerns, please do get a referral, and we will use obviously the safety guidelines in terms of social distancing and PPE, etc. But for the general population, outpatients is open and people are being seen. So we just want to make sure that services for people with an intellectual disability are also available on the same basis. So I just think that's important. Okay, I think that is probably, hopefully we have answered all the questions. And just to say, when you are starting off with the anti-dementia medications, we really start slow and build up and monitor, and that's really important. I just want to say thank you to you all for joining, and we have slightly run over time. I want to say thank you particularly to Emer for a wonderful presentation, and to Evelyn Riley, our candidate advanced nurse practitioner, to Pamela Dunn, clinical nurse specialist in the memory clinic, and to Marianne Fallon, our education and training officer. So thank you very much, and hopefully this is a really good service, and we hope that we get feedback from yourselves to help us to understand how we can build a service that will really work well for you and the people that you support. So thank you very much.